Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 27th of August. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and a lot of that is changing for many of you, especially in the north and the interior tonight. You can always go online to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov if you still have that bookmarked. The weather info line is a good place to go at 800-472-0391. Find us on Facebook. We've shared information with you there today since we last talked on Alaska Weather last night. On Twitter, you'll find information from places like NWS Fairbanks and NWS Juneau, as well as NWS Anchorage and, of course, NWS Alaska. And you can continue the weather conversation with anyone, and especially those at the Weather Service, to let us know what you see in your community, whether it's a picture or a storm report. Simply use the hashtag AKwx. That's short for Alaska Weather. And on YouTube in the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing. Several of our channels share that with you. NWS Anchorage is one of those. And after this broadcast, from our broadcast partner here at alaskapublic.org, you can find this complete show on YouTube with their website, or simply go to YouTube and search for AKwx TV, Alaska Weather TV for short. Let's get right to it. For South Central Alaska, we're talking about high winds tonight as low pressure sitting right over South Central, drawing a lot of air and rushing through the gaps. Places like Seward and Whittier and Thompson Pass and Valdez will all be dealing with some pretty gusty winds here in the next 24 hours, especially starting after 10 o'clock tonight. We'll walk you through it here. Seward is expecting northerly winds 35 to 50 miles per hour. Those are sustained winds. Gusts up to 60 miles per hour are possible. Again, especially after 10 o'clock tonight. Whittier, you're going to have a little bit more of a westerly flow, 35 to 50 miles per hour with gusts up to 65 miles per hour. For the Valdez area, we expect northeasterlies 35 to 50 miles per hour, gusts to 60. That's in town. Thompson Pass, you could see gusts up to 70 miles per hour. So a lot of wind rushing through the Chugach and out into Prince William Sound. Again, high wind warnings start at 10 o'clock tonight and last through 10 o'clock tomorrow morning in the red shaded areas. Up around Fairbanks, not only have you seen some rain, and those above the Chena River, above the Moose Creek Dam, have seen a lot of runoff there, so a lot of fast-moving water in that area. Flood advisories posted there for now until we get into Friday, and also across the upper Kuskokwim Valley, especially for the South Fork there. A flood advisory is in effect for that part of the river, very specifically. Again, that'll go until tomorrow afternoon. A look northward, and conditions are a little bit more wintry. For the large red shaded area here, this is the northeastern Brooks Range, of course, we're expecting enough snow for a winter storm warning. Storm totals, especially around Adigan Pass, could be on the order of 3 to 8 inches of snow. So most of that's going to be above 2,000 feet. 1 to 3 inches could come down tonight, though, so it's going to come down hard and heavy, and that means if you're still headed northward or trying to get out and come southward, that could really put a damper on how fast you can move tonight or if you can move at all. So be extra careful and plan ahead. The winter storm warning will continue through tonight and into tomorrow for a storm total of 3 to 8 inches in that area, not to mention some of the wind. For the red shaded area here around Barrow, specifically for Barrow, coastal flood warning is in effect there. We've had 10 to 14 foot breakers right along and just offshore. That's brought a surge of about 1 to 2 feet of water up into parts of Barrow. There has been flooding in town, and they've been working to do some repairs to keep the flooding minimized. However, the situation will continue to be probably close to its peak from this point on into the mid-evening hours or so before it starts to improve later on tonight and overnight. So the worst probably pretty close to happening now if it hasn't already happened. Now, that flood warning will continue at least through tonight and into tomorrow. Very early in the morning as conditions slowly improve. Just down the coast from Wainwright and down the Chukchi Seacoast, high surf advisory is in effect until midnight there. Conditions not quite as bad, but some of the water is running up onto the beach and likely causing erosion in those areas. We appreciate your reports of storm damage or beach erosion. And many of you around Barrow have shared pictures with us today. We appreciate that. If you'd like to do that, you can do that via Twitter. That's a very easy service to use and goes pretty light on your cell phone bill. So if you'd like to take a picture and tag us with NWS Fairbanks for the northern Arctic coast, or snow pictures through Adigan Pass, and use that hashtag AKwx, that really helps get the message to us and alerts forecasters in Fairbanks or South Central Alaska, in Anchorage or in Juneau, that you've got weather information that you want to share. And of course, we always take your phone call as well. So a lot going on around the last frontier tonight. Be safe no matter which part you're watching from. Let's get on to the weather forecast and what's going on across the Bering Sea and the North Pacific. And a lot of our weather changes have to do with the conflict of weather patterns right now. One of those coming up out of the North Pacific, and this great blossoming of Pacific moisture that's moving into the central and western parts of the Bering, against the colder and drier Arctic air that the season is trying to usher into many parts of Alaska. And you can see that north and westerly flow just dropping into the Kotzebue Sound region and Norton Sound, and that colder and drier air running into copious amounts of Pacific moisture across the interior, wringing out lots of rainfall for places in the upper Kuskokwim Valley, in the middle Tanana Valley, and many other places, including Bettles, picked up nearly an inch of rainfall today. And some of that, of course, is going to turn into snow across the northeastern parts of the Brooks Range. Here's the visible satellite picture, and boy, we're about done looking at this season. It just is running out of daylight to give us that information that we like to share with you here in Alaska Weather. But here it is, and you can see a great amount of dry air across the Gulf of Alaska for now, as we have a lot of north and westerly winds coming across some of that higher terrain. But look at all the cloud cover across the interior and northward. There's rain and snow across some of the higher terrain, and just a great deal of cloud cover and rainfall across the middle interior. Things are a little bit drier across the west, but there have been plenty of showers up and down the west coast today. And then we get back into some drier but cooler weather around St. Lawrence Island, including areas of fog. You can see plenty of clouds across the Bering, and there's certainly some fog across the central and southern parts of the Bering Sea, where you see some hit and miss breaks in that cloud cover. And for southeast, periods of rainfall should continue there as low pressure is spinning up. Each wave of cooler and drier air that drops southward is being reinforced by an upper level weather pattern that is going to keep some of those low pressure centers fairly strong, especially as they move out into the Gulf as we head into the weekend. They're strong enough now around Barrow, and they'll hover there for at least the next 24 to 36 hours, as you'll see on the weather map in a moment. So a lot going on above, and as we look down at the surface weather chart, you can see one of those waves of cooler air working through the Yukon Valley right now. Low pressure very close to Eagle at 997 millibars, crossing into the Alcan border region and then eastward into Yukon later on tonight. Another wave of low pressure sitting just south and east of Cordova and south of Yakutat at 1002 millibars. That's dragging in that drier air through the central and western Gulf, and as a result of some of those winds that we've already seen come up around Chillicothe Strait and Kodiak Island and Cook Inlet, we're seeing probably a little bit of dust and volcanic ash lofted up into the air. The resuspended ash is something that's pretty common when we get into this type of weather pattern. So if you think the sky looks a little hazy around Kodiak or Port Lions, you're probably seeing exactly that. We've also seen dust and probably a little bit of ash move into western parts of the Kenai Peninsula there as a result of the winds moving through that region earlier today. Low pressure again dragging in that cooler and drier air across the northern parts of the Bering. Right behind it, the second wave of cooler air working through the Chukchi Sea right now, wringing out rainfall. Of all that warm and wet air that made it up to the north is now being wrung out, and simply a lot of rainfall across the northern coast, as well as a tremendous amount of wind coming up across the Arctic coast with low pressure at 985 millibars. Way out to the west, we have warmer air working into the western Bering as a result of high pressure working that southerly, warmer Pacific water in the air northward across the western Bering. That high pressure system at 1,037 millibars, and look, it stays put there. It drops a little bit in intensity later tonight, but helping to encourage more drier air into the Gulf of Alaska. That's only spinning up low pressure across the north and eastern Gulf tonight. So periods of rainfall expected across southeast. The winds and the waves will be at their strongest tonight and into early tomorrow morning for Prince William Sound. So Whittier, Seward, and Valdez, and especially Thompson Pass, looking at some of those stronger gusts between 60 and 70 miles per hour. Watch for a little bit of snow across the Alaska Range, especially high up there. We're not talking about anything down low just yet. But rainfall will be showery in nature to the west, a little bit more steady across the east, Copper River Basin northward across some of the passes. We get into a little bit of drier weather across the middle Tanana and upper Yukon valleys. That's good news there. And then periods of snow again across the Adigan Pass region with storm totals as much as 3 to 8 inches by tomorrow. As we get into Friday, look for a frontal boundary to work across the Brooks Range and through Norton Sound. Of course, that front is just the leading edge of that colder and drier air mass. And as it drops southward, we'll start to see temperatures cool off across the Arctic coast with periods of rain and snow showers, especially in the morning there. A little bit better chance for rain in the afternoon. Offshore, we're looking at some snow showers there, especially the further north you go. High pressure is still in charge across the North Pacific, just south of Unalaska and Nikolsky. Periods of fog should be expected across the southern Bering, but on the western side of that is still that warm water pump in the atmosphere pushing rainfall across the western chain and into the St. Matthew Island waters, the Nunivak Island region, as well as coastal parts of southwest Alaska. Low pressure still across the eastern Gulf at 990 millibars, keeping parts of the Panhandle fairly wet. As we get into Saturday, a little bit more of a complex situation here. Low pressure gets recharged across Prince William Sound. That will bring in more clouds to the Alaska Range just to the north of the Susitna Valley. Most areas will probably stay dry in south central, but during the afternoon and evening, you'll start to see the weather change again. And into the upper Yukon Valley, showers are possible. Some of the higher terrain could be looking at some rain and snow showers mixed together. And the northwestern coast flirting with snow showers, but predominantly looking at rainfall there from Wainwright southward into the Kotzebue Sound region and Seward Peninsula, including places like Nome, looking at showery weather as a series of waves of cooler air continue to drop southward. So the Arctic kind of shaking it loose, stretching out a little bit, getting ready for the next fall and winter season here in Alaska with low pressure sitting across southeast. That'll keep a frontal boundary slowly dying very close to the southeastern coast as we get into Saturday and late night, Saturday night into Sunday. Now on to temperatures for southeast today. Temps were mainly in the mid to upper 50s, lower 60s as you got down toward Ketchikan and Annette. Yakutat was 54. Prince William Sound saw temps in the upper 50s, but Seward made it to nearly 70 degrees today, 64 in Kenai, 61 in Anchorage, lower 60s for the Susitna Valley as you get into the Copper River Basin, Gulkana and Glen Allen a little bit closer to 60 degrees. Fairbanks around 47 this afternoon, 52 in Eagle, 45 around Fort Yukon, 36 in AKwx Pass. As temperatures drop, it'll be easier for it to snow there, of course. Upper 30s for areas around the Beaufort Seacoast, and not quite freezing just yet. Lower 40s south of Wainwright into the Kotzebue Sound region, mid 40s there. 46 in Nome, 50 for St. Lawrence Island. Norton Sound temperatures in the upper 40s to about 50 degrees. Bristol Bay looking at temperatures on either side of 60 today, 65 in Kodiak, 50s and 60s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sand Point closer to 61, Dutch Harbor and Unalaska closer to 63, mid 50s for the Pribilofs with mid 60s for the Central Aleutians today. Atka at 66, a very mild day for you. Southwestern Alaska tonight looking at overnight lows in the lower 40s with Nome at 42, Barrow 32, 35 in Fort Yukon, mid 30s for the Middle Tanana Valley including North Pole and Fairbanks. South Central should stay a little bit below 40 degrees, so cooling down. Watch those temperatures if you're growing things still outside. 49 degrees in Kodiak and lower to mid 50s for southeast with highs tomorrow back in the mid 50s. Not a big change because of the weather and the clouds sitting right on top of you. 50s and 60s for most of South Central, 64 in Kodiak, upper 40s for Fairbanks. See, it's getting a little bit cooler there, and upper 30s for Barrow. 38 degrees for your high with Nome at 51, warm and wet weather for Southwest in the low to mid 50s. King Salmon at 58, and the Alaska Peninsula only in the 50s and 60s. Dutch Harbor, one of the warmer spots tomorrow at 62 out west. Flying weather shows a wide area of IFR all the way from Barrow down the west coast, from Tin City through the Bering Strait, out toward Bethel, Nunivak Island, and then for all of the chain. Just to the east of that, MVFR conditions should be expected, but we are going to see a lot of improvement take shape pretty early in the morning, though. I think many areas that are looking at MVFR conditions in the interior and for the Brooks Range will gradually see some improvement through the morning, so this will be more of an afternoon picture. You might have to wait it out a little bit while after lunch. For southeast, look for MVFR conditions through most of your day, with the exceptions being Chilkoot and White Pass. Let's take a look at those pass forecasts, though. AKwx Pass, at least starting at IFR conditions there toward MVFR. And remember, it's going to be snowing in Adigan Pass through at least midday. things should gradually improve and the ceiling should lift. But again, we're looking at a winter storm warning in that area, so tread lightly there for flying tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, VFR conditions expected there by the end of the day. Same goes for Rainy Pass, and for Windy Pass, we expect gradual improvement with MVFR expected for Isabel to start the day as well. Antasta Pass, we expect marginal conditions early on, but improvement during the day. Tanita Pass looks to see visual flight rule through most of your day, but watch for changes in the coming days. And Portage Pass, we expect to see VFR throughout the day. It is going to be a very windy day. It doesn't mean just because you can see, you can fly, of course. It is going to be pretty choppy. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions generally in the morning hours and then some improvement toward the afternoon. Now, freezing levels show the weather pattern very clearly, I think. We see the upper level freezing levels here from 2,000 feet all the way up to 14, even 16,000 feet. So a lot of warm air out to the west, but the cold air is winning Alaska right now. Those levels anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 feet across the interior, if not colder, over the Brooks Range and across the Alaska Range. Levels for southeast between 6,000 and 8,000 feet. What does that mean for icing? Well, there's enough moisture up there and enough cold air that we have to start talking about some occasional moderate for the northwestern coast above 1,000 feet, across the Yukon above 6,000 feet, most of that not reaching southeast, and above 12,000 feet for the south and western part of Alaska as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Again, some of that reaching occasional moderate, so be careful there. The jet stream shows that the Arctic is now at least open for business for the next few days, with low pressure driving winds down at 100 to 120 knots, a trough of low pressure across the east, but a fast building ridge across the west could end this pattern for us fairly quickly after this weekend. Low pressure across the western Yukon driving in a north and westerly flow for most of the state, with the exception being southeast. South and easterly flow up to 40 knots there, with strong gap winds expected across the Alaska Peninsula. Wind speeds there between 40 and 50 knots, so be very careful if you're flying around the Alaska Peninsula tomorrow, as the weather may not be horrible by sight, but there could be some hidden troubles there with turbulence and gap winds as you fly up and down the coast or through the passes. 20 to 35 knots offshore from the north and west. North and westerlies continue there. Winds are a little bit lighter, though, around Kaktovik for now at 3,000 feet. As we're looking at turbulence, of course, we expect some isolated areas of severe across Prince William Sound and probably through the gaps through the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and down toward the Alaska Peninsula below 4,000 feet. Some isolated chop across southern parts of southeast and across the northwest below 3,000 feet. So fly carefully, fly safe, and that's a look at your aviation weather. We'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Sizing up the stars in the summer triangle.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky. This week, we want you to kick back and relax under the stars.
It's the heart of summer, and those warm summer evenings are perfect for lying in the grass and looking up.
The brightest stars of the season are high overhead.
There you'll find a triangle of 3 celestial dazzlers, the stars of the summer triangle named Vega, Altair, and Deneb.
Let's show you. Okay, we have our sky set up for after sunset any night this week facing east. There aren't many bright stars visible lower in the eastern sky, so we're going to have to look up.
Let's take the skyboards up to the zenith. When you lie back in the grass, point your feet toward the east. You'll have a very similar view to this.
Now there are some bright stars. No matter if you live in the heart of a city or any light polluted sky, you should still be able to find these 3 stars distinctly. When you connect them with lines, they form a huge triangle over 30 degrees long and 20 degrees high.
Remember, the easy way to measure degrees in the sky, your fist at arm's length is about 10 degrees in width. So, see if your summer triangle is 2 fists high and 3 fists long.
The brightest star of the 3, and the one closest to the zenith just after sunset, is called Vega.
Do I detect a slight bluish tint to the star?
You sure do. Vega is a blue-white giant star, and this tells us its temperature. Blue is hotter than white, which is hotter than yellow. Vega is well over 16,800 degrees Fahrenheit on its surface, much hotter than our 10,000 degree yellow sun.
The second brightest star in the triangle, and the one off to the right, is called Altair. Altair is stark white in color with a temperature of 13,400 degrees Fahrenheit.
And the faintest of the three, over to the left, is called Deneb. Deneb is bluish white, not as blue as Vega, but hotter than Altair. It scorches space with a surface temperature of about 14,800 degrees Fahrenheit.
Each bright star in the summer triangle is part of its own constellation. If I use my imagination and some help from Rob, the Stargazer's graphics department, I can just make them out. Vega is part of the constellation Lyra the Harp. The stars make a tiny parallelogram hanging off Vega. In some pictures of Lyra, there's a bird around the harp, since some people also call this a vulture.
Altair is the eagle eye of the constellation Aquila the Eagle. If you can't see an eagle in those stars, you're not alone. But at least you know where the eye is.
And Deneb is the tail star of the stellar swan, the constellation Cygnus. Okay, that's an easy one to picture with his body and long, stretched out beak. Since Cygnus forms a cross shape, it's also called the Northern Cross.
Now let's talk distances. Vega is the brightest of the three stars, but is not the closest. That honor goes to Altair, who is only 17 light years away from us. With professional telescopes, we can actually see that Altair is spinning rapidly. It spins so fast that it has squished its shape to resemble a blue-white egg.
Vega is the second closest at about 25 light years away. That means the light that you see left Vega 25 years ago. That was back when I had hair.
Deneb is not only the farthest of the three, it is perhaps the farthest star you could see with the naked eye. At a whopping 3,000 light years away, we can still see it as a bright star. That means Deneb must be humongous. Here is a side-by-side comparison of the three summer triangle stars.
Wowzers, Deneb dwarfs the other two.
So, kick back and relax this week.
Enjoy the warm summer nights and look for the summer triangle.
Vega, Altair, and Deneb shine high in the sky, so definitely keep looking up.
It's a time-honored tradition, teaching the next generation how to fish and enjoy our rivers. But what are you teaching them? Rivers change constantly, producing new hazards such as snags, holes, and rocks. And tragedy can strike in an instant. Keep your family traditions alive. Wear a life jacket. Don't drink and boat. Know the river conditions and be watchful with children. That way there will always be another trip.
Sea surface temperatures remain cold enough to support ice, and with a lot of the strong winds moving across the North Slope right now and the Arctic coast, we're seeing a lot of that ice that's been melting in place very slowly starting to move around a lot. So be on your guard. We do know of some traffic that's had a little trouble making the transit there from Prudhoe Bay toward Kaktovik. There's a lot of open water around, but there's some very thick ice that is still on the move across the Beaufort Seacoast today. As we look at southeastern Alaska for tomorrow, there's an opportunity for maybe an isolated storm or two in some of the offshore coastal areas there. 15 to 20 knots across the outer coast with 30-knot winds coming in from the north and east outside of Yakutat. Inside waters looking at 20 to 30 knots with 4 to 6 foot seas on Friday. Winds and waves should improve as we get into Saturday. Northerlies 15 to 20 knots on the inside, stronger though in the Clarence Strait from the south and east with 25 knots there and 6 foot seas. Easterlies north of Cross Sound toward Yakutat at 15 knots and westerlies coming ashore at 10 to 15 knots with 8 to 10 foot seas across the southern coast. For South Central, much stronger winds, of course, tomorrow, starting tonight through tomorrow morning. A high wind warning for many parts of the Prince William Sound area all the way down towards Seward. Northwesterlies inside Prince William Sound at 30 knots. Northerlies on the outside up to 11 foot seas there. 35 to 40 knot winds coming off of the Kenai Peninsula. Northerlies coming down Cook Inlet at 20 knots. Northwesterlies cutting over the Barrens at 40 knots with 11 to 13 foot seas, and 25 to as strong as 40 knots on either side of Kodiak Island, 13 foot seas to the east. Those diminish on Saturday down to 9 feet. North winds coming across Prince William Sound at 15 knots, but notice the wind still cutting through the Barrens, 20 to as high as 40 knots east of the Barren Islands, and northerlies settling down in the Cook Inlet at 10 knots with 3 foot seas expected by Saturday. For the Alaska Peninsula, higher winds and gusts are expected east and south of the peninsula as we go through the day. So once again, watch the gaps. Northwesterlies inside of Bristol Bay with a 7 foot sea, 6 foot seas a little bit further down the coast, and 25 to 30 knot winds from Kodiak Island southward with 7 to 10 foot seas on Friday. Then 11 to 10 foot seas there on Saturday with higher gusts still possible. 25 knots inside of Bristol Bay with 8 foot seas expected as we start up the weekend. Heading westward into the chain, look for high pressure to drag in southerlies across Kiska and Attu. 30 knots with 12 to 15 foot seas expected there. South and southwesterlies for the central and eastern chain. 15 to as high as 25 knots north of Dutch Harbor and Alaska with 5 to 6 foot seas in the east. Those become 8 foot seas as we head into Saturday with westerlies continuing to strengthen there. Southwesterlies across the central chain, and southerlies continue with 12 foot sea on a 20 to 25 knot southerly wind. Across the west coast, south and westerly winds will start to diminish a little bit more. 25 to 30 knot winds expected tomorrow. 25 to 30 knots as you head from Kuskokwim Bay out toward the Pribilofs there with 5 to 8 foot seas on Friday. Becoming more north and westerly as we get into the weekend. Again, that means cooler weather coming down the west coast, and get used to that for most of the weekend. 20 to 25 knots in all areas with 6 to 7 foot seas in the north, 8 to 9 foot seas across the southern Bering Sea coast. As we get across the north slope, look for more of a westerly flow again. That's going to move a lot of that thicker and floating ice around in the Beaufort Sea. 11 to as high as 7 to 11 foot seas they're expected across the Beaufort with that north and westerly flow still coming ashore. Northwesterlies outside of Kotzebue Sound with 25 knots and a 6 foot sea on Friday, becoming 30 knots with an 11 foot sea on Saturday. Winds become southerly and blow offshore on Saturday with 15 knots in all areas in the Beaufort with 4 to 6 foot seas. And again, the next wave will follow that again, so look for another change in the wind direction over the weekend. A lot going on tonight. Winter storm warnings in the northeastern Brooks Range with as much as 3 to 8 inches of snow around Adigan Pass, making travel difficult there. Coastal flood warnings around Point Barrow. That'll continue through the evening and into the nighttime hours there as conditions are at their worst likely right now. A high surf advisory for the Chukchi Seacoast and high wind warnings around Prince William Sound for gusts that could reach upwards of 60 to 70 miles per hour, including Thompson Pass, Seward, Whittier, and the Portage region. Look for colder air to continue dropping southward as we go into your weekend with wet weather on the way. Thanks for watching Alaska.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.